The air was crisp that morning, the kind that filled your lungs with the smell of pine and faint smoke from someone's distant chimney. It was early, barely past 6. The town of Elmridge was still quiet, wrapped in the hush that came after a snowfall during the night. St. Luke's Chapel, nestled at the base of the mountain ridge, stood quietly against the pale blue dawn. Inside, Father Thomas moved through the sanctuary with his usual calm rhythm. He had always been an early riser, finding comfort in silence before the day began. He lit the altar candles one by one, their small flames dancing in the still air. The stained glass windows filtered the rising sun into soft reds and blues that washed across the empty pews. That it was a morning like any other. Peaceful, predictable, until he heard it. The door, which he had left cracked open to let in the morning light, creaked. At first, he thought it was the wind. Then came the footsteps, low, deliberate. Not the shuffling sound of shoes or boots on wood, but something softer, lighter. Pads, not soles. Father Thomas turned. A large grey wolf stood in the doorway. For a few seconds, he could only stare. It was not a dream. The animal was real, its coat thick and streaked with frost, its eyes an amber hue, so piercing they seemed to see through him. Snow clung to its fur. Its breath steamed in the cold air. As it stood still, surveying the chapel. Father Thomas didn't move. Neither did the wolf. It stepped forward, not with a snarl or growl, not with aggression or fear, but with the slow, steady confidence of something that knew exactly where it was going. It walked down the center aisle between the rows of wooden pews, every step echoing slightly on the floorboards. Its presence was impossible to ignore. The priest's hand brushed over his chest, instinctively resting on the small silver cross that hung around his neck. His heart beat faster, but not from fear. Strangely, he didn't feel afraid at all. In fact, something about the moment felt familiar, as if the wolf belonged there, as if this had already been written somewhere. The wolf paused at the foot of the altar, then sat down. Its head tilted slightly, eyes fixed on the priest. It did not blink. It did not budge. It simply watched. Behind him, the chapel doors creaked again, and a few early visitors from the town, older folks, who came to pray quietly before the official service entered, and froze at the sight. Is that a wolf? Someone whispered. No one dared to raise their voice. A couple stepped backward, out of instinct, but Father Thomas raised a hand gently, not to stop the wolf but to stop them. It's all right, he said softly. His voice barely broke the silence. He took one slow step forward. The wolf didn't move. Its ears twitched slightly, its eyes never leaving his. There was something about that gaze. It wasn't wild. It wasn't hostile. It was asking. Father Thomas couldn't explain it. There was no growling, no fear in its posture. Instead, there was a strange sadness there, a kind of tiredness and purpose, as though this animal had walked a long way, not by accident, but to be here. With every second that passed, the tension in the room melted into curiosity. The wolf remained still, calm, sacred. Even the candles flickered slightly, as if stirred by some invisible shift. Then, without warning, the wolf stood. It turned toward the door, looking back once at the priest. Its head gave a small, subtle motion, almost like a gesture. Then it walked back down the aisle, toward the light spilling in from outside. Father Thomas stood still for only a moment longer, then took a breath, and followed it. The wind greeted them both as Father Thomas stepped outside, squinting into the soft morning sun. The wolf had already crossed the frost-dusted grass outside the chapel, its grey fur rippling like smoke against the white ground. It didn't run. It didn't look back. It just moved steadily north, toward the edge of town. The priest hesitated for just a moment. Behind him, someone called his name, concerned. Father, should we call animal control? He turned halfway, then shook his head. No, he said simply, his voice calm. Not yet. With that, he pulled his long wool coat tighter around him and began to walk. There was a strange quietness in Elmridge that morning. The town hadn't fully woken yet. Shop windows remained dark. Cars sat idle under a dusting of snow. The only movement came from the priest's boots crunching over the sidewalk, and the wolf's careful padding ahead of him. What struck Father Thomas most was how deliberate it all felt. This wasn't a wild creature stumbling into human space out of hunger or confusion. No, this wolf moved like it knew exactly where it was going, and exactly who it wanted with it. They passed Mrs. Grady's diner. The smell of fresh bread, already starting to drift out from the chimney. A curtain moved as someone peered out. No one else followed. The sight of a priest quietly trailing a wolf was too strange to interfere with. Thomas had spent decades guiding people, offering comfort, interpreting signs. But this was different. It wasn't symbolic or metaphorical. It was real. Every step forward raised more questions. Was he dreaming? Was this some test of faith? Or was he simply being pulled by something he couldn't yet understand? The wolf led him past the edge of town, where the paved road gave way to gravel and then to dirt. They passed the old Miller property, long abandoned, its barn sagging under years of wind and neglect. And still the wolf pressed on, silent and sure. Once, or twice, the animal paused, sniffing the air or glancing back to make sure the priest was still there. Their eyes met briefly. No growl, no fear, just a sense of recognition. The forest came into view, ahead a line of tall pines dusted with snow. The same forest that children in town were told not to wander into. Too dense, too wild, too many stories. But the wolf didn't hesitate, and neither did Father Thomas. The first steps into the woods were colder. The wind was sharper here, and the light dimmer. Trees towered above them, their limbs arching like cathedral ceilings. Snow crunched beneath his boots, and every now and then, he'd hear a branch creak high above. The sound sharp in the otherwise complete silence. The wolf moved more slowly now, weaving through trees and over old roots, as if it knew they were approaching something. Father Thomas followed closely, his breath visible in the cold air. His heart beat loud in his ears. He didn't know how far they had come, maybe a mile, maybe two. But the chapel felt far behind them now, and the trail was no longer marked. Just the wolf, the woods, and the man trying to understand why he couldn't turn back. Then the wolf stopped. It stood at the edge of a small clearing, its body still, ears alert. Father Thomas came up beside it, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The clearing ahead was quiet, untouched. Snow blanketed the ground in a smooth sheet. At the center stood a large fallen tree, its trunk broken and hollow, like something had lived there once, or still did. The wolf gave a soft, low wiener sound full of something unspoken. Then it stepped forward into the clearing. Father Thomas followed, knowing without understanding that this was where things would change. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Father Thomas stepped into the clearing. Following the wolf, the air around him felt heavier, thick with quiet anticipation, like stepping into a sacred space not meant for many feet. The trees, tall and close-knit, arched above like silent sentinels. Snow clung to their branches, and not a single bird sang. It was so still, the priest could hear his own heartbeat. Steady, but fast. The wolf paused, near the fallen tree, sniffing at a hollow spot beneath the bark. Then it looked back at him again, just once, before continuing its path beyond the clearing. The priest hesitated. The clearing alone already felt like the destination, but the wolf insisted otherwise. Its body language was clear. It hadn't brought him here to stop, not yet. So he moved forward again, boots crunching softly. His breath clouded the air before him. Each exhale a visible sign of how far he was now from his warm chapel, and the comfortable certainty of routine. But something inside him pushed him on, not out of curiosity. Curiosity fades when fear or doubt sets in. This was deeper, like obedience to something he didn't yet understand. They walked on. The path was no path at all, just natural gaps between trees and slopes worn down by animals and time. Branches reached out like arms, brushing his coat and tugging at his sleeves. The sun was rising higher now, casting golden light through breaks in the canopy. But it felt dimmer in here, quiet, watching. The wolf's pace slowed slightly. Its limp was more noticeable now, its back right leg dragging slightly with every few steps. Father Thomas frowned at the sight. It must have been injured, yet it never whimpered, never stopped to rest. There was determination in its stride, purpose, like it knew time mattered. Eventually, they reached a ridge, where the trees opened slightly, revealing a sweeping view of the valley below. Father Thomas paused, momentarily stunned. He hadn't known this view existed. The church sat somewhere far below, now just a small white blur in the distance. Beyond it, the entire town of Elmridge rested under a blanket of snow and early sunlight. It was beautiful, breathtaking even, but it made him realize just how far they'd come, how far this wolf had led him. But it wasn't finished yet. It turned again and led him down a narrow slope on the far side of the ridge. The ground was softer, here mossy and damp beneath the snow. Father Thomas stumbled once, catching himself on a low branch. He wasn't a young man anymore. His knees reminded him of that with each uneven step. But the wolf didn't notice. Or maybe it did, and it simply trusted him to keep up. Then, just as the priest's legs began to protest and his breath came heavier, the wolf stopped again. They had arrived. This new clearing was smaller, more concealed, surrounded by tall pines and thick brush. It felt untouched, like a place forgotten by time. At the center of it all sat a low mound covered in frost and pine needles. Not quite natural, as if someone or something had shaped it. The wolf walked straight to it. It sniffed the mound gently, then sat down beside it, its chest rising and falling with quiet breaths. It made no sound, no howl, no whimper, just stillness, watching, waiting. Father Thomas slowly approached. His eyes scanned the area, and everything else seemed disturbed. No other tracks, no wildlife, just this lone wolf, this mound of earth, and the whisper of wind through the trees. Kneeling slowly beside the mound, he saw it clearly now. Stones had been placed around it, deliberately, with care. It wasn't just a mound. It was a grave. And for the first time, Father Thomas realized this wolf hadn't led him astray. It had led him to someone. Father Thomas knelt in silence, his gloved hand brushing away the light dusting of snow atop the mound. The shape of it, the size, it was unmistakable. Someone was buried here. Not by professionals, not with a headstone or a casket, but with care, love, even. The circle of stones was weathered but deliberate. A few had markings on them, scratches, almost symbols. One was shaped into a rough heart, chipped at the edge. The wind blew softly through the pine needles above, but down here, at the base of the trees, all was still. Time didn't seem to move in this part of the forest. The wolf lay down beside the grave, front legs stretched forward, eyes fixed on the mound. It didn't move, didn't blink. It looked at peace. Father Thomas's eyes shifted. Just beyond the grave, tucked near the base of the fallen tree, was something covered in a layer of dirt and old leaves. His hand moved slowly, brushing the debris away. It was a tarp. Beneath it, a frayed sleeping bag, an empty metal cup, a small rusted pot, and an old canvas rucksack, faded by time and weather. A chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the cold. Whoever had lived here had done so for a long time. And then he saw the letters, tied with twine, slightly warped from moisture, but still intact. A small bundle of envelopes sat neatly under a flat stone. One envelope lay on top, cleaner than the rest, as if it had been placed there recently. Maybe by the wolf, maybe by the person before they passed. The name written on it, in shaky but familiar handwriting, made Father Thomas's heart stutter. Thomas. He stared at the envelope for a long moment before picking it up. His fingers trembled. The wolf lifted its head slightly but didn't move. Carefully, he unfolded the letter and began to read. Father, if you're reading this, it means the wolf found you, or you found him. I prayed you would. I know I disappeared. I never said goodbye. I wasn't strong enough. But I didn't stop listening. Every Sunday, I sat out here, just close enough to hear your voice echo through the trees. Sometimes, I'd close my eyes and pretend I was still sitting in the back pew, behind the candle rack, like I always did. That voice, yours, it was the only thing that kept me from falling apart some nights. I never expected forgiveness. I ran. I left things undone, unsaid, but I want you to know this. I was never truly alone. One winter, years ago, I found a wounded wolf caught in a trap near the creek. I freed him, fed him scraps, sat with him while he healed. He stayed. Through everything, he stayed. He watched over me in silence. And in return, I think I gave him peace too. If he brought you here, then maybe, just maybe, you'll know this isn't the end. Not really. You always said grace finds us, even in the woods, even when we don't think we deserve it. Thank you for being the one voice I could always hear. Aaron. Father Thomas lowered the letter, his hands trembling now, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming rush of memory. Aaron, a boy with quiet eyes and a shy smile, a soul burdened early by grief and guilt. He had once come to the church every Sunday, sometimes sitting alone long after the service ended. Then one day, he vanished. People talked, assumed, moved on. But Aaron hadn't left the mountain. He had been here all along. A noise broke the silence, a low, mournful sound. The priest looked up. The wolf had closed its eyes now, resting its head on its paws beside the grave. Father Thomas, a man of scripture and certainty, felt tears sting his eyes, because in this clearing, In this forgotten corner of the world, something sacred had unfolded. The letter still trembled in Father Thomas's hands, long after he had finished reading. He had faced grief before, had comforted widows, buried children, spoken words over caskets, when no words ever felt sufficient. But this was different. This was personal. Aaron's face returned to him, no clearer than it had been in years. The boy had been 17 when he disappeared. Quiet, gentle, but deeply wounded. Life had not been kind to him. He came to the church seeking something, maybe hope, maybe shelter, maybe just a place to feel safe. Thomas remembered how the boy often lingered behind, as if waiting for someone to notice he was still there. He also remembered how he failed to ask why. Father Thomas sat down beside the wolf and the grave, legs folding slowly beneath him. The forest floor was cold and uneven, but he barely noticed. He set the letter beside him and reached into the small rucksack Aaron had left. Inside were a few remnants, a cracked photograph of a young boy and a woman, Aaron and his mother, most likely a weathered notebook, a pocket Bible with dog-eared pages, and a rosary made from polished wooden beads. The priest ran the beads between his fingers. They were warm, as if they had just been held. The wolf shifted slightly, opening one amber eye to look at him. Thomas met its gaze and spoke for the first time since reading the letter. "You stayed with him," he said quietly. "You were his witness." The wolf blinked slowly, then closed its eye again. There was something deeply solemn in the animal's stillness. It had guided the priest, not just to a place, but to a memory, to truth. It had carried out a mission, one it clearly understood, with more reverence than most humans ever could. For a long while, Father Thomas simply sat in the clearing, surrounded by the silence of the trees and the heartbeat of something ancient, grief, perhaps, or love. The lines blurred. Eventually, he pulled the notebook from the rucksack and opened it. Inside were short journal entries, some just a few words, others longer. Notes about the weather, sketches of animals, memories of voices echoing from the chapel far below, and prayers, so many prayers. "God, I don't know if you hear me from out here, but I hear you. I hear you in the wind, in the trees, in the wolf's breath when he sleeps. I'm sorry I never made it back. Please don't let them forget me completely." Father Thomas closed the notebook gently and bowed his head. "You were never forgotten. Aaron," he whispered, "you were missed, and you were found." He didn't know how long he stayed in the clearing. Time moved differently here. It felt like hours, and only minutes all at once. But eventually, he stood again, joints stiff, and gathered the letters and belongings with care. He placed a flat stone on the top of the grave, then gently laid the rosary on it, not as a symbol of death, but as a quiet marker of peace. The wolf rose as well. It gave a soft grunt and limped back to Father Thomas's side. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. No words, no noise, just shared understanding. Then, the wolf turned and began walking back the way they had come, back through the pines, back toward the edge of town. Father Thomas followed, his hands full of memory and loss, and something else, too, something lighter, grace. He understood now. The wolf hadn't wandered into the church seeking shelter or food. It had come seeking witness, and it had chosen him. The walk back felt different. The snow had begun to fall again, not heavy, just a soft dusting, like the forest was tucking itself in for winter. Father Thomas followed the wolf along the narrow trail, retracing their steps through the hush of trees and wind. The forest no longer felt ominous. It felt sacred now, as if it had been holding a secret for years and had finally chosen to release it. Each step the priest took was heavier with thought. The letters pressed against his chest, tucked safely inside his coat, felt like a heartbeat. A story finally spoken. A weight finally passed on. The wolf limped ahead, unhurried. Though clearly injured, it moved with a calm rhythm, as though it had been waiting for this journey to end for a long time. And now that it had fulfilled its purpose, it had one last task: to return the truth where it belonged. When they reached the ridge, Father Thomas paused to look over the town again. Elmridge lay nestled beneath the snow like a postcard, quiet streets, rooftops lined in white, the faint bell tower of the church peeking above it all. He wondered how many others down there were carrying stories like Aaron's, burdens they never voiced, wounds they tended in silence. He had preached for years about love, forgiveness, the power of grace. But sometimes grace didn't come in the way people expected. Sometimes it came limping out of the woods with fur like smoke and eyes that held sorrow. And sometimes it came too late for the living, but not too late for the truth. They reached the edge of the forest just as the sun broke through the cloud cover. Light spilled across the snow in golden streaks, casting long shadows behind them. The warmth touched Father Thomas's face, and he closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the wolf had stopped. It stood on the edge of town, where the path met pavement again, and looked back at him one last time. There was something final in its gaze. Not sadness, but release. A letting go. Father Thomas stepped forward, placing his hand over his heart. "Thank you," he said, voice soft. "You were never just an animal, were you?" The wolf blinked once, then turned. It didn't head into town. It didn't follow the road or seek shelter. Instead, it walked to the edge of the trees and sat beneath a pine, its body sinking slowly into the snow, like a shadow becoming part of the earth again. It watched him for a few moments more, then rested its head on its paws, still, silent, at peace. Father Thomas stood there for a long time. He knew better than to disturb it. Later that morning, when he returned to the chapel, the townspeople greeted him with curiosity and concern. Some had seen him leave. Others had heard whispers about the wolf. But the look in his eyes silenced their questions. There was something different in his posture, calm, but deeper, like someone who had seen something sacred and could not unsee it. He stepped into the pulpit that Sunday, without a prepared sermon. He spoke only of grace, not the kind written in doctrine or preached from pulpits, but the kind that walks quietly beside you in the cold, that keeps watch over the broken, that carries your name across years and wilderness. And when he told the story, not all of it, but enough, no one interrupted. Even the children sat wide-eyed still, because sometimes, when grace comes walking, you listen. The days that followed moved slowly, as though the whole town of Elmridge had entered a kind of gentle hush. The snow lingered longer than usual, blanketing the roads and rooftops with an unusual softness. People still came to the church, some to pray, others simply to sit in the warmth, surrounded by quiet and candlelight. But they spoke in softer tones now, as though the old wooden walls had witnessed something they couldn't quite explain. Father Thomas found himself changed, though he didn't try to explain it, not with words. Anyway, he carried the letters with him every day, wrapped carefully in cloth and placed in the drawer of his desk. Sometimes he read them again, sometimes just one sentence was enough to bring the weight of it all rushing back. Aaron's story was not just a tragedy, it was a mirror, a message, and it had become part of his ministry, even if the town never heard every detail. One afternoon, a young woman named Sarah came into the chapel. She had grown up in Elmridge, had left for college, and only recently returned. Father Thomas hadn't seen her since she was a teenager. She sat in the last pew for nearly an hour before he joined her, just as he had once done with Aaron years ago. She didn't look at him, just stared at the candles. "Is it true?" she asked. "About the wolf? About the boy?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, most of it is." Sarah's eyes glistened. "I used to know him," she whispered. "Aaron. In school. He gave me his gloves once, when mine were torn. He didn't say a word, just handed them to me." Father Thomas looked at her gently. He remembered people, even when he felt forgotten. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly and stood. "I'm glad someone followed him home." After she left, the priest lit a candle beside the others. One more small flame for a soul remembered. That night, sleep didn't come easily. He tossed beneath the quilt in his small room above the chapel, Aaron's letter running over and over through his mind. The forest, the grave, the wolf's gaze. It haunted him, but not in the way nightmares do. It was something quieter. A calling, perhaps. When morning broke, pale and blue, he made a decision. He took the rucksack, the notebook, and the letters, and walked to the local library. The librarian, a woman named June, had a deep respect for history and a quiet heart for sorrow. He told her Aaron's story. Not all of it, some parts still belonged to the forest, but enough. She didn't ask many questions. Instead, she listened, and then she carefully scanned the letters, preserving them in the town archive. Later that week, a small wooden box was placed at the back of the chapel. It had no label, no name, just a note beside it that read, "For those we forgot, for those we remember now." People began to add to it. A photo, a short note, a pressed flower, quiet offerings of memory and regret. The box never overflowed, yet it was never empty. Something about it comforted people. Then, one morning, nearly a week after the forest walk, Father Thomas returned to the edge of the woods. The wolf had not been seen since that day. He knelt near the pine where it had rested, brushing the snow aside. No tracks, no body, just a faint depression in the earth, and a single pinnacone placed neatly in the center. He smiled. "Goodbye, friend," he whispered, as he stood and turned back toward the town. The wind stirred the branches, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he heard it one last low howl. Far in the distance, not of mourning, but of peace. Spring came late to Elmridge that year, but when it did, it arrived gently. Snowmelt trickled down the hillsides, coaxing green shoots from beneath the frosted ground. The trees, once bare and brittle, began to bud with promise. The townspeople went about their days, as they always had, chatting on front porches, sweeping off sidewalks, but something had shifted. Not everyone could name it. Still, they felt it in the quiet moments, in the way people listened more closely, spoke more carefully. At the chapel, Father Thomas stood, beneath the bell tower with a cup of tea and a letter in his pocket, one of Aaron's. He no longer read them every day. Some stories needed to be held closely for a while, before they could be released. But he always kept one with him, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. Aaron's voice reminded him of what mattered most, that being present with someone in their pain was more powerful than trying to fix it. The memory of the wolf had taken on a life of its own in town. Some children said it had glowing eyes. Others said it disappeared like smoke when the snow melted. Father Thomas never confirmed or denied anything. Let them wonder, he thought. Let mystery do what it does best, lead us to meaning. One afternoon, a boy named Caleb, no older than 10, came to the chapel. He carried a worn notebook in his hands and asked if he could leave it in the wooden memory box. Father Thomas nodded and knelt beside him. "Who is it for?" he asked softly. The boy shrugged. "I don't know. Just ... someone. In case they're out there and think nobody remembers." Thomas placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "That's a good reason." As the weeks passed, more offerings appeared. A bracelet, a page torn from a hymnal, a feather, neatly wrapped in ribbon. The box became less of a container, and more of a living altar, evidence that people had stories they couldn't always tell aloud, but needed to share all the same. And then, one Sunday near the end of May, Father Thomas stepped into the pulpit with a new message. His voice was steady, but there was a lightness in it that hadn't been there for a long time. "We are not meant to carry all our stories alone," he said. "Some of them ache, some are unfinished. Some have been buried for years, beneath the snow, but they matter. Every one of them. And grace, ... It doesn't always come wrapped in sermons or scripture. Sometimes, it walks beside us in silence. Sometimes, it waits in the trees. There were no murmurs, no coughs, just stillness. A kind of listening that wrapped around the chapel like a warm wind. After the service, a few people lingered. One woman left a drawing of a wolf in the memory box, its eyes gentle, its head bowed. Another brought a single white flower and laid it at the base of the altar. Later that evening, Father Thomas walked alone toward the ridge where the forest met the town. He paused at the edge of the trees, looking out over Elmridge. The rooftops caught the golden light of sunset, casting long shadows across the grass. Somewhere far off, an owl called. The air smelled of pine and something sweeter, almost like lilac. He closed his eyes. He didn't expect to see the wolf again. Some stories ended, not with fanfare, but with quiet departure. But what it left behind, truth, memory, healing, that was enough. He turned back toward the chapel, the fading sun at his back, the letters tucked once again in his coat. The world felt a little softer now, as if grace had walked through it, because maybe, just maybe, it had.